We've got plenty of in-house data that we've been collecting from both our continuous counters and our short-term counters. And now we're establishing a lot of data sharing partnerships with local agencies that are also providing data to us as well. So we have a lot of data right now. And I know over the past few years, we've been making various attempts at loading that data into TMAS. I am not the specific data analyst that does that. But I'm here today to try to see if there's any nuggets that we can get as far as how we can push through and successfully load that data this year.
So if anybody needs help, let's say you've got the data and you think you may have the format right, but maybe it isn't, you could send it to me. I would be happy to run it in our test server and check it out for you, or we can bring it into the main national database and process it for you, see how it goes. Doesn't work, as what happened with your colleague, Liz Stoltz. It didn't work with their station data. I spent, I don't know, it's like an hour and a half, 2 hours working with her, literally digit by digit on the station data. Boom, came right in after I, went through it with her. So anybody who has this issue where you don't know if you have the format right, let me know and I'd be happy to. We're thinking with the piped format, it'll be a lot better. By the way, if you have used the old TMG format, that long was very difficult to do in the old format. New 2022 TMG, we're using world coordinates, no implied decimal, no negative. You have the negative in there now. So it makes it very easy with the lat long with putting it in compared to the old format. So we've the new station record is greatly simplified than it was before. No, you don't have to move the 2022 TMG format if you don't want to, but if you haven't done 2016 and you want to use a format, I would recommend going to the 2022 TMG. And anybody who has it and needs us to check it, we'd be happy to do that for you. Yeah. So
thank you, Stephen. I think we'd want to follow up with you soon after and have a meeting with our FDOT team. Thank you.
There are a couple comments in line. The EcoCounter EcoVisio platform has beta add-on, provides the ability to export data in the TMAS format. It's currently being piloted by a few DOT states, so there's a partial answer there. Another colleague here shared that there is, I'm going back to it, Kinetic software by Q-Free may have TMAS format. And we're going to go back to the National Bikeway Network question. There was a question about how geometry is managed there, Steve. For example, how are paths next to a roadway classified as a separate line feature or something appended to the road segment? Similar question for sidewalks, where there may be things going on. Can you talk a little bit more about that, and people may follow up with questions there?
Yeah, it's perfectly fine to have line work that, and it's all detailed in the formats where you can detail whether it's a sidewalk or it's a path or it's a separated, and there's all kinds of attributes about the line work that you can put on your GIS network to make sure it's properly, it could be a bike lane that's next to a road or, on a road. It could be one that's separated. It could be a separate path that's next to, maybe has a culvert or a barrier between it. All of that is perfectly acceptable with the line work. And we understand that there's going to be a lot of line work on the NBN that isn't at all related to the Arnold, HPMS Arnold world. It could be, some path that people are using for dirt bikes, or, could be anything. And it won't be on the National Highway System or the Principal Alternative System or any of the Arnold network. But that's okay. That's why we have want to do the NBN, because the way we see it is the better we can know where the network is that will have accounts on it, helps us prepare for us being able to properly have a network that we are doing safety analysis the right way, considering the different ways of which people go from different modes, all of those aspects of travel patterns. Yeah. Hope that makes sense. So perfectly fine. And I think the system is built to handle all of those scenarios. We work through all kinds of different scenarios. There's about maybe like 15 different scenarios that we worked through when we were developing the formats. Where we literally had the expert panel say, give us your tough, your toughest, what you could think of that you'd have to code. And then we said, okay, does this work? Does this work? Does this work? And we fed it in there. Yeah.
Liz Stoles has a follow-up question for Neil from EcoCounter about which states may be leading. And so I wonder, Neil, if you could either respond to that, unless there's proprietary information or something involved. I know that one of the benefits of these types of conversations that they enable individuals to speak with each other. So is there anything else you can elaborate there without breaking any protocols you have?
I guess the question to Neil also is, when with this beta testing that you're doing, which is great that you have this out here now, when are you cutting that off to where you'll actually go to production with the, and by the way, there is no TMAS format. There is no TMAS data format. The TMAS follows the traffic monitoring guide format. So I'm glad that EcoCounter is building the traffic monitoring guide format into their software. And so it would be prudent upon our highways to ask EcoCounter to code both the 2016 and the 2022 TMG formats. So that way people, when they export, their data would go right into TMAS.
Can you hear me, Greg?
Yep, can hear you, Neil. Thank you for joining in.
Yeah, not a problem. Currently, it is Minnesota DOT and Texas DOT with the help of TTI that are using the FHWA format. It's pretty close to being released, but we're just looking to get feedback from state DOTs, and both of those programs have some interesting use cases that we're working on with them.
Great. And do you have a timing for that release? Will it be in 2022, 2023, or 2023 or 2024?
Definitely 2024, hopefully 2023. Okay,
great. Good.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments for Scott?
Let me just insert one little thing here, Greg. What if you want to have, if you want to send your data to federal highways, when you go out for bid, include in your bid that you need to have the 2016 and or 2022 TMG format in your contract. By putting it in the contract, then it tells the vendors, hey, this is important to my customer. I better make sure that I deliver it. And if they can't deliver it, they need to put an exclusion, and which might keep them from being able to actually win that contract. So if you want to have this implemented and have the easy button where you get the data in from a portable or permanent counter, and then you can just hit export and then send it to federal highways if you think it represents what took place, that's what you need to have happen. That's what you need to put in your contract. It's putting it in those contracts that's actually going to get the vendors to put it in their software. It isn't me yelling at them and asking them nicely. That won't get it done because I'm not paying their bills. And Neil could probably speak to that. Yeah.
We have another question come in. Sarah O'Brien asks, is FHWA developing a national pedestrian network to complement the NBN? For example, can you talk about the relationship of these systems to what the Bureau of Transportation Statistics is working on regarding bike and ped facility data?
Yeah, they have asked us for the NBN, and we are working with them on that. So with BTS, yeah. So they plan on getting a feed from us to them, and right now it's just one agency. But we hope that at some point it's a bunch of others, and because they don't have the network that I'm aware of, and so they're relying upon other data sources. Yeah. Great question, Sarah. Hopefully that answers it for you. And we've already had conversations with them with the data exchanges that's going to take place. Right now, it's just one agency.
So you're not doing pedestrian?
The National Bikeway Network is just bikes, yes.
And there's no plans to do pedestrian?
Not with our software. I don't know who's going to be doing the pedestrian network as far as development of that. What we're providing to BTS is the Bikeway GIS networks that we've been provided by agencies.
Thanks.
Yeah. But I could check on that. If anybody here was with Federal Highways that is aware of some work that's going on that, let me know. Yeah. That is, so why do we use the National Bikeway versus all pedestrian? That's a much larger network is where all the pedestrians go. And so we chose the National Bikeway Network to get our feet wet with what it can do. And I really think that many of the ways of which and the aspects of in the traffic monitoring guide, the formats, if you take both of those two documents together, the National Bikeway Network and the TMG format, and you put those kind of not together, but you merge those together, I think you could obtain a pretty good format to have for a national pedestrian network. You could definitely do that because it's pretty much covered. I mean, all those aspects of it from what I know.
Sirisha Kuturi reports that there are efforts underway at the University of Washington under the direction of Mark Hallenbeck and people at MIT to develop routable pedestrian networks. So I think Mark mentioned that at one of our previous meetings. Thank you, Sirisha, for reminding us of that. Other comments or questions? Steve, I'm going to ask a question. My casual observation is that over this decade, it sort of follows up on this last question, that we've made greater progress in monitoring bicycle traffic than pedestrian traffic. And that pedestrian traffic in many cases is larger and more complex. And so we have an inverse relationship there between, for example, number of walkers compared to cyclists and our understanding of where they are. And can you comment if you think that's a valid observation? And if so, what do you think that, how can we ramp up pedestrian monitoring so that it catches up to, I think, where its rightful place is, particularly in, well, I think it's in both urban and rural America, but can you talk about that, please?
Yeah, I think that's definitely the case, Greg, that we've taken the easier of the two monitoring, and that's what we've done for the most part really, really well. Is it because it's easier? Is it because it's more accurate? I don't know the reasons behind it. That's a local agency who are primarily doing that, and or counties, MPOs that are doing that, and why they've, it seems that's been my perception too. How can it be fixed? I think that seeing the need for a proper denominator of exposure from a safety perspective and from who's using our network, and maybe with do we need to plow a facility for people to run, jog, and use their bicycles in all kinds of different uses that's along the trail. We need to measure it so that way we know the influence of when something isn't plowed or something isn't, like for example, I was looking at a path recently and it was full of gravel, and I thought, well, that'd be awful. Not so bad on a bicycle so much, but if you're running and then you hit this and you start sliding around, and that would be just it's a big safety issue, and so having it swept off and make sure it's maintained is really important. So I think we just need to know the reasons why it's important that these counts are done, and then obtain that information. I think the better we can have a similar format, that where if somebody does a count, then I can compare my count versus your count, and it's consistent in that all the counting devices should be calibrated every year. And you should have a process for doing that. That's in the traffic monitoring guide. It's really important that we have similar factoring methods, so that way when you annualize that value and you're comparing different agencies' information, that we are consistent that way. So all those things can be done. And there are definitely counter technologies now for pedestrian that does a very good job of counting, in my opinion. So I don't think that we've got that problem where we don't have decent counters. I think the counters definitely exist for pedestrians, can do it really well. So, yeah.
Thank you.
And if anybody has any reports on their QC of when they've been looking at the results, I mean, it's always recommended, if you're going to be evaluating a technology or a counting device from a vendor, it's really good that you always check to make sure with a manual observation or some ground truthing that you're find acceptable in your agency, check all the devices, not you need to check just to make sure, if you're buying, let's say 30 counters, you need to check a decent number of them, at least probably 5 or more to 10 of them, to make sure that the devices are consistent and measure accurate values. So that way, when you deploy those across your network to do portable or permanent counting, that you've got accurate information. So.
Thank you for sharing those thoughts.
Sure. One more thing. Sorry. Video counting, in my opinion, has come a long way. If you have not explored video counting, I would highly recommend taking another look at it. I've been in the counting industry over 20 years, and somebody shows up at your doorstep and they're a vendor and they say, hey, I've got the best thing since sliced bread. And you say, okay, let's take a look at it. And so you go to the field, you test it, and then you come back and you're like, man, that didn't really work that well. And you weren't too happy with those results, for whatever reason. If you haven't done video counting in the last 2 years, I would highly recommend trying out video counting. It is artificial intelligence, machine learning has really perfected the pixel. This is something that's transpired, and it is really, really doing a good job now. And, I haven't looked at any reports with non-motorized, with micromobility, with bike and ped counting, with video counting, but I know from a motorized perspective, this is definitely something that I've seen numerous states have verified the accuracies of video counting, and it's really doing a really good job. So I would suspect I've seen some TRB papers on this, and those two also are showing very promising results. So this allows you to stay out of the road and do a really good job of doing traffic data collection. So.
Good. We have a question here from Liz Stoles. Would FHWA be open to or willing to help try to fund a research project or synthesis project to review all the different repositories that have evolved and the data sets to see if they can integrate those micromobility systems?
Well, I don't know about all. All is a big word to use. I wouldn't say all. I know Jeremy Raw, and I don't know if he's on the call or...
Yeah, Joshua Roll is on the call.
No. This is Jeremy Raw.
Oh,
and
Raw.
Darren Buck. So either one of them, they have had a project where they were trying to incentivize agencies and take their information and then turn it into data that's in TMG format that can be submitted to TMAS. And I don't think that they had success in those, so they would have to speak to that. I was not involved with that very closely, other than we were going to set up their accounts, and that didn't take place. So, yeah. So I would not be opposed to that, but we don't have any funding that has been designated for that purpose, Liz. So it's not a bad idea. We might be able to take some of the larger data sets and obtain those, and then and put them in the format. I'm not opposed to doing that either. So. I do have to say, when you look at this gamut, I mean, the usefulness of the travel monitoring analysis system is tremendous across the United States. There's a lot of agencies who send in the data. We receive 7,000 permanent counters for motorized, 3,000 class sites, and 600 WIM sites on a monthly basis. So this is TMAS is a very humming, very busy system. We want to receive in a similar fashion from the micromobility, pedestrian, bicycle counts. We want to receive that same information from agencies. We know there's a whole bunch of this data out there, and we're just not receiving it yet. And however best we can grease the wheels to help that data come in, I would be all for that. And maybe that is a research project to help with doing that. So, yeah.
Other questions from colleagues, comments from colleagues?
If anybody needs assistance, let me know. We can help you with formatting of the information. We've taken literally gigabytes worth of data from agencies and said, all right, here's your data. We will review it and format it for you. If you're using a system, there's mainly 4 vendors in the United States. If you're using one of those processing vendors, by all means, ask them, hey, are you exporting in the 2016 or 2022 TMG formats so I can send my data once it's in the system into federal highways? That's a question to ask whoever it is that you're using for processing software. Over probably close to 40 states now are using processing software that is a company that is doing it for you. So it's most of the states in the United States have a company that does their accounting, and they're feeding their data into a system. So.
Great. Here's a question that's come in from Josh Roll.
Uh-huh.
I don't see much in the 2022 TMG about push buttons for pedestrian traffic monitoring. What are your thoughts, Steve, on this emerging practice?
I don't know what push buttons are. You mean if you push a button and then you get a count from that?
Yeah,
Is that what he's asking?
Activation.
Would that be acceptable as a format to submit to federal highways through the format of the 2022 TMG? I'd have to think about that. It's a counting mechanism. I don't know how the push buttons relate to actual reality of what an actual count is. If you, Josh, have done a verification process where you say, okay, this is the method that we use for utilizing push button activations for how many people are utilizing a crosswalk, I wouldn't be opposed to including that in TMAS. It might be something that we'd have to somehow tag as a kind of a special, not a special count, but just a count that is not maybe a traditional method, and it may need some kind of factoring process to turn it into a real count, a whole count. Yeah.
Josh, any clarification there or response to Steve?
Or hopefully that answers this question.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, I'm just curious, not submitting them directly, but there's been some really great work by Utah DOT and folks like Patrick Singleton. We actually have them on contract doing work for us now, building adjustment factors after comparing the push buttons with observed data. And doesn't sound like this is well-known practice at this point, and it's going to depend a lot on how your signals are set up, and so it might not work everywhere. But just curious if you've been thinking much about this as a way forward, you know, for an agency like the Oregon Department of Transportation, where we work, and where we're getting our signal data set up into a repository where we can actually access the data. We're hoping that these data represent kind of almost a leapfrog in terms of using available assets to collect data.
Sure.
And of course, they're going to come with some caveats, and they're going to require these adjustment factors. But really curious about your thoughts overall, you and Greg and others.
I would not be opposed to utilizing a data source like this, as long as it's been verified. This is the actuations that we get, and this is the appropriate factors from our research that shows that this is what needs to be done for it to be utilized to represent the crosswalk. Let's say if it's a push button for a crosswalk, and then you I mean, because there's all kinds of, I mean, if you think about your favorite count technology, whatever it is, if it's road tube, if it's infrared, if it's video, what, I don't care what the technology is, nothing's perfect. It all has errors. If you're doing video and you're shooting 4 lanes, you're going to have occlusion. If you're, there's all, it doesn't make a difference what the technology is. We all at certain times miss video. If you're doing a manual count, I swear, when I did that manual count and I sat there and watched the video for an hour, I swear I didn't miss any vehicles. But I've done so many manual counts that I'm like, man, how did I miss a vehicle? We do. Okay, so nothing's perfect. So so knowing what that error is, Josh, and then you say to yourself, well, is that error acceptable for what my counts are going to be used for? And then if that's acceptable to that agency, and you've documented that process of what you looked at and how you factored it and how you turned it into a portable count for that time increment, to do the adjustments throughout the day, then boom, you have a count, and then you can submit that to federal highways. It would be perfectly fine. And it should be noted as that's somewhere in the source. And if we need to amend the TMG to include that as a data source, I wouldn't be opposed to doing that. So that's something I'm going to look at, is making sure that we can put a push button counts that are, factored and put that in there. So maybe that's an oversight on our part in not including that. So let me see. Okay. Hopefully I answered your question. Yeah.
Thanks, Stephen.
Yeah, because there's all kinds of technologies that we have out there at our disposal. Yeah.
Actually, this is a question, also an advertisement. Our next session of Conversations for Colleagues is going to look at frontiers in data fusion. And Sarisha Katuri, who's on the line here, is going to speak, as well with people from TTI who are in the forefront of this research. And Steve, sort of as a teaser, could you share with us your perspective on data fusion and how it complements traditional count programs or extends them. And at some point, could the methods you mentioned AI a second again. How do you foresee that in this next decade of progress, interacting and possibly changing what you're doing now?
Yeah, you mean pro-based data you're mainly talking about?
Well,
Or others?
a variety of types. Sometimes crowdsourced data. There's there's like, what's the validity of a streetlight estimate? There are a lot of different ways that people are trying to get at these problems, and I'm curious about your perspective of how the next decade will change how you run TMAS, the TMG, TMAS, and these other systems, because
So
the advances using AI.
So we're going to be looking at including in the traffic monitoring guide trajectory data. It's being considered right now, and we're just getting started in this realm. The traffic monitoring guide and TMAS has always been point-based data, but we know from vehicle signature data through IVR, through other information that's available now through the chapter 6 that we just added, that there's a bunch of trajectory information that agencies now have access to. So how do we handle that? Well, how do we use it? What are the methods? And so we're starting to that research into what's going to be involved in that arena. Including in that would be like what we're doing with the study 1572. I'll put it in the chat pod. If anybody's interested in vehicle signature data, we're wanting agencies to join that. It's the pool fund solicitation 1572. We're going to be looking at trajectory of vehicles, not trajectories, I'm sorry, re-identifying vehicles using the vehicle signatures from loops in the road. Could that also be done with bicycles? I think it could. But I haven't done the research on that. I have done the research on motorized sites, and I know it can be done for motorized. But these kinds of information. So what used to be point-based information, we got to forget about point-based information. We got to think our data is representing line-based information in between points. So I think that's the way it's going in the future, whether it be from pro-based devices, whether it be from devices, artificial intelligence that my camera can look at I see just a couple of pictures on here. I see Fred's picture and he's got a tie on, and Fred with his tie rides on his bicycle and he goes past my counter, and I say, okay, there's Fred, and I can do facial recognition, and then I see Fred 5 miles later is still riding with his tie and still has the same facial recognition. And I re-identify that same bicyclist. And I say to them, okay, it took Fred this long to go from here to there. Now I have trajectory information along that path. This is the way we're going. We got to quit thinking about point and go to the network of what we tell between our sites. This is the way I think it's going in the future. So hopefully that makes sense. And we plan on putting that in the TMG.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Any other following questions? We have just a couple of more moments. And then Steve did offer to stay on and illustrate some of the software programs if anyone would care to do that. But is there any other concluding questions that anyone has at this point? Well, if not,
well, Greg, it'd be good to know who wants to stay on and see the demo of the software, software.
What we can do is I'll do a commercial here for upcoming conversations. Before I do that, Steve, I want to thank you for informative, exciting conversation over the past hour. I think we've all learned something. I think we've seen both the progress over the past decade and set the stage for the types of issues that will emerge in the next decade of bike and ped data management and monitoring and management. We have 2 other conversations with colleagues planned for later this year, June 20th. We're going to talk about progress in data fusion, integrating big data with traditional accounts to improve traffic estimates. And one of the things that we've noticed over the past decade is because of our progress, there are now jobs in this field that didn't exist a decade ago. Sarah Bryan and others referred to them as data wranglers. One of the questions is, how do we at universities prepare people for these types of data management jobs? So we want to explore that in September in a meeting. So I want to thank all of you for joining us today. I particularly want to thank Steve for his presentation. And if folks want to stay online for any additional conversation with Steve, I can keep the system open. Thanks again. Steve, let's
Thank
take
you
a
so
couple
much.
minutes.
It's been
See
very
what
good meeting. This is Ahmed, by the way. Thank you, Greg.
Okay. So I'm going to shut off the recorder now. And then what we can do is, folks, anyone who may want to stay on for additional conversation with Steve, please do so. And then we'll go on for the remainder of the day. Thank you for joining us.
What's your time limit, Greg?
How many folks we have here? We got 22. Well, I can keep the system on. I may not be able to stay the whole long, but I can, I can keep the thing on. The critical thing is, what's your time frame, Steve? Because you it's an hour.
I have no limit. I can stay here till 2 hours if somebody wants to stay that long. I can't drag somebody into wanting to learn, but if somebody wants to learn, I'm all for it. So whatever I can do to help somebody to learn about either the National Bikeway. So what do you want to see? Do you want to see the NBN or you want to see TMAS? What do you want to see? Either one.